The headframe stood against the sky at the top of the switchbacks, like a thing left by people who had believed they were coming back. She had seen it from 3 miles off and 1,000 feet below, a black skeleton of timber up on the shoulder of the mountain where the trees gave out, and she had climbed toward it all afternoon on a road gone to washboard and slide. Because a structure built that high at that cost was built over something, and the something was the kind of question she followed the way other people followed money or love or the plain need to be somewhere they were expected. No one expected her anywhere. That was the whole of her freedom and most of the price of it, and she had made her peace with both a long time ago, at an age when most people are still being told when to come in for supper and are still sure that someone will always be there to tell them. She was 18 years old. She carried the whole of what she owned on her back, 30 pounds of it, pared down over the years to the few things that earned their place, a change of clothes rolled tight against the wet, a folding knife worn smooth at the spine, a box of matches sealed in a plastic bread bag, a tin cup, a stub of candle, and a small soft-covered notebook with a pencil laid in its spine and folded in the back. A little under $9 she had not needed to spend in some days. She traveled light because everything a person carries is a thing she must carry, and she wanted little enough from the world that she could hold it all on her shoulders and still climb a mountain to see what a dead mine was hiding. She was climbing, and the headframe grew against the sky as she came, and by the time she reached the bench of flattened ground where the works stood, the sun had gone behind the peak and the long blue shadow of the mountain had come down over everything. The mine had been a hardrock operation and a serious one. She walked the bench in the failing light and read it the way she read all such places, by what was left. There was the headframe over the collar of the shaft, its great sheave wheels still up top, gone to rust but whole. There was the hoist house beside it, a low stout building of stone and timber with its roof mostly sound, and inside it, when she put her head through the doorway, the black bulk of the hoist itself, a drum the size of a hay wagon wound with wire rope, and the engine that had turned it, and the brake, and the levers worn bright by the hands of the men who had run it. There were the ore bins and the collapsed remains of a mill down the slope, and a scatter of dark mouths in the hillside where the upper workings broke the surface, and a cookhouse gone to a heap, and the small stone shells of the places the miners had slept. It had the look of a town that had been a machine, every building a working part of the one great work of tearing metal out of the mountain, and the machine had stopped, all at once by the look of it, the way they do when the price of the metal falls below the cost of the tearing, and the people had walked down the switchbacks and not come back, and the mountain had begun the slow, patient business of taking it all back into itself. She made her camp that first night in the hoist house, out of the wind, and in the morning she began to understand that the shaft was not empty. It was the flame that told her. She had gone to the collar of the shaft in the gray dawn, to the place where the headframe stood over a square black opening fenced with a rail gone to rust, and she had leaned over the fence and dropped a pebble the way a person does and counted, and she had lost the count, because the sound of it striking bottom never came, or came so faint and so long after that she could not be sure she had heard it and not invented it. And she had lit her candle to look down into the collar, to see the guides and the timbering going down, and when she held the flame out over the opening it had leaned, not guttered in a draught, leaned, steadily, drawn downward, the way a flame leans toward a thing that is breathing in. The shaft was pulling air. A dead shaft, a shaft with no fire in it and no engine running, does not pull air, not like that, not with that slow, even hunger, and she drew the candle back and watched it stand straight again, and thought about what it meant, and what it meant was that somewhere far down in the mountain there was a place where the air went, and air that goes somewhere, goes to somewhere, and she stood at the collar in the cold dawn, and understood that she was going to have to go down. She was not a fool about it. She had grown up hard and careful, and she knew the two things that kill people in old mines, which are the falling and the bad air, and she respected them the way you respect a river you mean to cross, not with fear but with attention. The falling she could guard against. The bad air she could not fight, only read, and the reading of it was the oldest knowledge the miners had, and the candle was the tool of it. A flame burns tall and bright in good air, burns low and blue and troubled where the air has gone dead, and goes out where the air will not keep a life. She would carry the flame ahead of her and watch it and trust it, the way the men who dug the place had trusted it before there was any better science than a candle and a canary and the sense to turn back. But first she had to get down, and 1,000 feet of shaft is not a thing a person climbs. It is a thing a person rides, on the cage, on the hoist, and the hoist had not turned in 50 years. So she repaired it. That took her the better part of 4 days, and it was the kind of work she loved without ever having told anyone she loved it, because there had never been anyone to tell. She learned the hoist first, the way she learned everything, by attention. She spent a whole day just understanding it, sitting on the bright-worn operator's seat and tracing every rod and linkage from the levers to the drum, working out what turned what and what stopped what. Reading the machine the way you read a sentence in a language you half know, guessing at the words you do not have from the shape of the ones you do. She found the maker's plate riveted to the frame and the date cast into it, and did the arithmetic, and knew the machine was older than any person now living, and she found the marks the operators had scratched into the paint beside the levers, depth marks, level marks, a private shorthand of the men who had run it blind by feel and count in the dark. And she puzzled at them until they gave up their meaning, and each one she understood made the machine less a dead thing and more a language she was slowly coming to read. It was a steam hoist once, and had been converted to a crude oil engine late in its life, and the engine was seized, its pistons rusted fast in their bores, and she did not try to free them, because she did not need the engine. She needed only the drum to turn, and the drum could be turned by hand through the great reduction gears if she could free them and grease them, slowly, a cage load at a time, and she could hold it with the brake, which was the part that mattered most, because the brake was the only thing between the cage and the bottom of a 1,000-foot shaft. And she took the brake apart down to its last pin, and cleaned it and studied it, and put it back and tested it against the locked drum with all her weight until she trusted it, and only then did she trust it. She freed the gears with penetrating oil she found in a rusted can in the hoist house, and patience she had brought with her, working each frozen shaft a little at a time, backward and forward, an inch, and then 2, until the rust broke its grip and the metal remembered how to move. She greased everything from a keg of hard old grease she softened by the fire. She inspected the wire rope inch by inch, running it slowly off the drum and over the sheave and back, feeling for the broken wires that make a rope untrustworthy, the treacherous little barbs of failure that catch the skin, and she found some, as anyone would in a rope that old. But they were few, and scattered and not clustered at any one place, which is the clustering that means a rope is dying. And she judged the rope sound enough to carry one small, careful person up and down a few times if that person did not make a habit of it. She found the cage at the collar where the last shift had left it, a cage for men, an iron box the size of a closet with a gate, and she cleaned it and worked its gate and its safety dogs, the spring-loaded jaws that were meant to grip the guides and stop the cage if ever the rope let go, and she tested the dogs by hand until they bit clean and sure, because the dogs were the second thing between her and the bottom, after the break, and a careful person wants more than one thing between herself and a fall like that. And on the 5th morning, in the gray light, she was ready, and she stood at the collar with the cage before her and the black shaft below, and knew that all her care had bought her only the right to be afraid in an orderly way, and she went anyway, because the flame had leaned, and the air went down, and the air went to somewhere, and she had come too far up the mountain to stand at the top of the answer and climb back down without it. She could not run the hoist and ride the cage at once. That was the problem she had turned over for a day and solved the only way it could be solved, which was slowly. She rigged the brake with a long lever she could reach through the cage gate for the first stretch, and she lowered herself hand over hand on the brake, a foot at a time, standing in the cage in the dark with her candle burning steady on the cage floor, and the guides sliding up past her, and the square of gray daylight at the collar shrinking overhead. It was the slowest and most frightening travel of her life, and she did it with her jaw set and her eyes on the flame. And the flame burned tall and bright, which meant the air was good, which meant she could go on, and she went on, down and down into the mountain, past the mouths of the upper levels that opened off the shaft as black doorways with their rails running out into the dark, past the drip and trickle of the mountain's water, finding its way down the timbering. Down past any daylight at all into a dark so complete that the candle was the whole of the world, and the shaft was only the little that the candle could reach. She counted the levels as she passed them, the way she counted everything, a habit against the fear, and lost the count somewhere in the deep dark and did not start it again, because the number had stopped meaning anything. There was only down, and the flame and the slow ache building in her arms where she worked the brake, and the small sounds of the mountain in the shaft, the tick of cooling rock, and the far-off patient drip of water, and, under it all, the vast unbroken silence of 1,000 feet of stone standing between her and the sky. And then, far down, so far down that her arms ached from the brake and she had lost all sense of how deep she had come, the flame changed. It did not gutter and it did not go out. It sank. It drew down from a tall, bright teardrop to a low, troubled bud of blue-hearted light, and it leaned, and it burned wrong, and she stopped the cage on the brake and stood very still and watched it, and felt the first cold touch of the fear she had come down prepared to meet. Bad air, not dead, not yet, not the killing air that snuffs a flame and then a life in the same breath, but bad, going bad, the air of a place where something had used up the good of it, and she stood in the stopped cage in the deep dark and made herself think instead of climb. Because the animal in her wanted to haul on the brake and run for the daylight 1,000 feet up, and the animal was going to get her killed if she let it steer. She watched the flame. It held at its low blue bud. It did not sink further. So the bad air was a layer, a pocket, not a rising tide, and she was at the top of it, and below it, if the flame was to be believed, the air might be good again, because good air was what she had smelled coming out of the collar all along, air that went down and came from somewhere, and a somewhere with good air. The bad layer was between her and it. She could go back up and never know. Or she could go down through the bad air fast, holding her breath through the worst of it, trusting the flame to tell her when she was clear, and reach the good air below. It was the kind of choice her whole life had been made of, and she made it the way she made all of them, by deciding what she could bear to not have known, and she could not bear to not have known, and so she took 3 slow deep breaths of the good air above the layer until her blood was full of it, and she held the last one, and she ran the cage down on the brake as fast as she dared into the low blue dark, watching the flame sink and sink until it was a bare blue crawl on the wick that she thought would die, and then, below, watching it lift. Lift and steady and climb back up the wick to a tall, bright, honest yellow teardrop, and she let her held breath go and drew a new one, and the air was good, cool and good and moving, and the cage came down the last of the shaft into a place where the guides ended and the shaft opened out, and her candle showed her a level floor of laid plank and a wall of dressed stone, and, set into the wall, a door. She brought the cage to rest on the brake and set its dogs and stood a moment with her hand on the cold iron of the cage gate, breathing the good air, letting her heart come down. Then she took up the candle and opened the gate and stepped out onto the plank floor of the deepest level of the mine, 1,000 feet under the mountain, and she crossed to the door in the stone and lifted its latch, and it was greased. The latch was greased and worn bright by a hand that had used it, and the door swung inward without a sound. And out of the dark room beyond came a still dry warmth and the smell of tallow and old paper and cold ash, and she stooped and went in, and she was not the first person to have made a home at the bottom of the world. The room was hewn from a played-out stope and dressed and lined and made right, and she saw at once, before her mind had named the particulars. that it had been made by someone who understood the mountain and did not fear it, which is a rarer thing than courage. There was a bed against the stone, an iron frame with a rope base and a mattress of ticking. There was a stove, small and black, but its pipe did not rise. It ran level along the wall and away into a bored channel. And she understood, following it with the candle, that in a place with no up to send the smoke, the woman who built this had run her flue into the mine's own ventilation, into the natural draft that pulled the air down the shaft and along the levels and up some far raise to the surface, the same draft that had leaned the flame at the collar and told the drifter girl that the shaft was breathing. The room did not fight the mountain's air. It joined it. It sat in the flow of it and borrowed it, warmed itself and vented itself on the mountain's own slow breath, and the whole of it was so exactly right, so perfectly matched to the deep strange place it lived in, that she stood in the middle of it with the candle and felt something close to reverence, which was not a feeling she had much use for or much practice at. There was a workbench along one wall, and on it the tools of a person who kept machinery alive, files and taps and a small forge cold now, wrenches ranked by size, a micrometer in a wooden case, a technical thing or two she could not name. There were shelves of tins and crocks. There was a lantern, which she lit, and the room came up warm and brown around her. There was a chair worn smooth by long sitting, and a small shelf of books, technical most of them, handbooks of engines and ropes and the strength of materials, their margins penciled thick, with a small exact hand that argued with the printed pages, and corrected them, and now and then she would mocked them gently. There was a rack where a set of work clothes hung, canvas and duck gone stiff with the years, cut for a woman shorter and broader than herself, and a pair of heavy boots beneath them stood side by side as if their owner had only just stepped out of them. And there was, in a niche cut into the stone above the bed, a single small window that was not a window. A pane of thick glass set into a short board tunnel that ran out to the face of the mountain far away, so that on a clear day the drifter girl would learn a coin of real daylight came down the little bore and lay on the stone wall of the room, moving with the sun, the one honest scrap of the outer world that reached the bottom of the shaft. And she understood that the woman had cut it by hand through 100 feet of rock, for no reason, but that a person who lives in the dark comes to need, more than food almost, the sight of the light she is not standing in. And on the workbench, weighted under a fist of raw ore heavy with the dull gleam of the metal the mine had died for, there was a book. It was a ledger, cloth-bound, and its ruled pages were filled in a small exact hand, an engineer's hand, printed rather than written, each letter formed the same way every time, the hand of a mind that valued being understood over being admired. She carried it to the stool by the cold stove and opened it and read, and the woman who had built the room at the bottom of the shaft came up out of the pages toward her, slowly, and never all the way, which was right, because a stranger's whole self is not owed for the price of finding her house. She gave no name. The first entry was a date in a winter near the middle of the last century, and a single exact line, "The hoist is mine now. I am the last one who knows it, and I will not leave it to seize." After that the dates ran on for years. She had been the mine's engineer, or one of them, the one who ran and mended the hoist, and when the price of the metal fell and the company closed the works and the men went down the switchbacks, she had not gone, because she could not, she wrote, make herself walk away from a machine she understood and leave it to rust, any more than a person can walk away from an animal they have kept alive with their own hands. So she had stayed, and lived, and to live she had made the room, in the one played-out stope where the air ran good and the mountain was quiet, and she had kept the hoist. She had gone up and down the shaft on her own careful travel, up to the surface for what the surface offered, and down to the deep room that was her home, and she had greased the gears and tested the brake, and inspected the rope for 50 years. One woman keeping a great machine alive under a mountain for no wage and no reason but that she knew how, and it would have died without her. She wrote about the air. Of course she did. She had lived in it. She wrote of the bad layer on the shaft, the pocket of dead air that gathered at a certain depth in the still seasons and thinned in the windy ones. And she wrote of it the way she wrote of everything, exactly, with the depth marked and the seasons noted, and in the middle of a page, set apart with a ruled line above and below, was the rule the drifter girl had worked out for herself in the cage an hour before, written plain by a woman 50 years dead. The dead air lies in a layer, not a flood. Go down through it fast, and the good air is below. But watch the flame. And if it drowns, you are already too far, and there is nothing below worth your life. She read it 3 times. She had learned it the hard way, holding her breath in a sinking blue light 1,000 feet down, and it had cost her nothing but the fear, and the fear had been the tuition, and she had paid it, and would not pay it twice. The entries ran on. The woman grew old at the bottom of the shaft. The hand stayed exact, but the entries thinned, the years widening between them, until near the end they were mostly the maintenance of the machine. The grease renewed. The brake tested. The rope inspected. A life reduced to the keeping of the one thing she had stayed for. And the last entry, undated, at the head of an otherwise empty page was not maintenance and not a rule. It said, "The brake is good, and the dogs are good, and the rope will bear one careful soul a good while yet. I have kept it as long as I was able. Keep it after me." And under that, smaller, "The water at the sump is sweet if you let the first of it run." Then the hand stopped, and the rest of the ledger was empty, and the woman had gone out of it the way she had gone out of the world, exactly and without complaint, leaving behind her a greased hoist and a tested brake, and a room in good order and a machine kept alive against the day someone would come down the shaft who needed it to carry them. She closed the book. She sat with her hands flat on its cover and the deep mountain silent around her, the good air moving slow and cool through the room on the draft that never stopped, and she felt a thing she did not try to name. Then she set the ledger back on the bench under its knot of ore, because it belonged there and was not hers to carry off, and she took up her own notebook and turned to a fresh page and began, in her own plain hand, to write down what she had, the way the woman had written what she had, because that was how a found place became a kept one, not by the finding, by the account. And the first line she wrote was not about the bed or the stove or the ore. It was this: "The dead air lies in a layer. Go down fast and watch the flame." She underlined it twice. Then she went on. The days took on a shape, though there was no day down there, only the lantern and the candle and the slow, cool breath of the mountain, and she came to keep her own time by tasks and by sleep, and did not miss the sun as much as she had feared she would. And when she did miss it, she rode the cage up on the brake through the good air and the bad layer, and the good air above it, and stood at the collar in the wind and the light until she had her fill, and then she went back down to the work. And on the clear days, before she climbed, she learned to watch for the coin of light that came down the woman's little bore and lay on the wall above the bed. And she would sit and watch it move the slow width of the stone as the sun crossed the far mouth of the tunnel, and it was not much, a pale, round scrap of day 1,000 feet under the mountain, but it was honest, and it was enough, and she understood the woman better for the wanting of it than for anything in all the ledger. There was always work. The hoist above all, she took up the woman's watch over it as if it had been left to her in a will, greasing the gears and testing the brake and running the rope for its broken wires, because the hoist was the one road up and down, and a road unkept is a road that kills you, and she found that the keeping of it filled a place in her the way it must have filled a place in the woman. A reason to be exactly careful, a machine that would die without her, and lived because she came. She learned the sump at the deep end of the level where the mountain's water gathered clear and cold, and she let the first of it run and drank the rest, and it was sweet. She set the room to rights, swept its swept floor for the claiming of it, aired the mattress, oiled the tools and ranked them as her own hand liked them, and left the woman's tins on the shelf where the count in the ledger had stopped, Out of a courtesy she could not have explained and did not try. She never learned the whole of her. She did not expect to. But she came to know the shape of the woman's mind by living in the room it had made and keeping the machine it had kept, and she thought that the two of them had wanted the same thing, which was not to be left alone so much as to be left to the work, to have a hard exact task that the world could not take from them and did not understand, and to do it well in a place of their own making where no one came to tell them they were doing it for nothing. It was not for nothing. The drifter girl rode the cage down through the bad air, and the flame lifted below it, and she stepped out into the warm, brown light of the room 1,000 feet under the mountain, and it was not for nothing. Because she was there, and the hoist ran, and the room was warm, and the account went on. On an evening that was not an evening, she sat on the stool by the ticking stove with the lantern lit, and the woman's ledger closed under its knot of ore, and her own notebook open on her knee. The mountain breathed its slow, cool breath through the room, and up the shaft, and out to the sky she could not see, and somewhere far above the wind was doing what the wind did, and she was warm and dry and deep, and safe in the exact way that only a well-kept machine can make a person safe. She was 18 years old. She had a folding knife, a box of matches, a tin cup, and a little under $9 she had not spent and now had nowhere to spend and did not miss. She had a room hewn from a played-out stove, a stove that borrowed the mountain's breath, sweet water at the sump, a hoist she kept as her own, and a book she had not written full of a life she would never wholly know, teaching her still. She turned to a fresh page and smoothed it flat with the side of her hand, and 1,000 feet of dark mountain stood over her and did not trouble her at all. And she began to write, in the small exact hand she was learning from a woman 50 years dead, the first line of the keeping of the only home she had ever made her own.